This episode of Currently Inked for October 13th, 2016 is brought to you by Ness Pens at vanness1938.com. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Currently Inked. Glad to have you here. Got some fun pens, got some fun things to talk about. It has been the week of mail deliveries. Lots and lots of loot this week. So for starters, I decided I wanted to upgrade the nibs on a few of my pens. So I put an order in from fpnibs.com. It's a Spanish company. They've got a bunch of nibs, steel, gold, a bunch of different grinds. They'll do custom grinds. So I picked a bunch of different finishes. So they have the Jowo two-tone gold nibs that are rhodium and ruthenium plated, so the silver and black, and I got that for one of my pens. I have semi-flex number 6 nibs, so I got that for another one of my pens. I'll be talking through those a little bit later. So those came in this week. I received a package from India from one viewer containing some Brill inks, which I've not used before. Unfortunately, one of the bottles broke in transit. The other 2 bottles leaked. One of them leaked to the point of being almost completely empty, and the other one is still mostly full. Unfortunately, I've had to put the inks in different bottles, and I'll talk about that when I get to the reviews. But those came in and look nice. I also placed an order in for the sponsor for this episode, Van Ness. So I got Pilot Custom Heritage 823, my first time to get one of those. Bought myself another Schaefer Legacy 2 because I liked the first one so much. And actually, I didn't realize this, but those Schaefer Legacy 2s come in this big gift presentation box with this inkwell in it, which is kind of cool. It's a glass inkwell with the little feather stopper. So that's kind of fun. I didn't realize that came with because when I bought the last one, when I had bought the last one, I bought it at the San Francisco show, and so they didn't bring all the cases with them. So when I ordered it, this big old case came. I was like, oh, wow. So that was kind of a surprise. Got some new envelopes because I ran out of my Clairefontaine envelopes, which are the ones I prefer to use, the ones from the Triomphe line. Let's see, what else came in this week? Oh, one of my cameras needed to be repaired, so I sent that off. That came back this week. I got some new Bristol artist trading cards that I use for my ink swatches. I'd run out of those, so I put in an order for those. And another viewer sent me a pen to review. It is the Pelican Calculation of Times. So that arrived on Saturday. And so it's been a lot of deliveries. The poor postal people are real sick and tired of me showing up with the little pickup slip because I have everything delivered to my P.O. box. But yeah, so a lot of fun stuff to play with. And we'll get to one of the other deliveries that arrived this week in just a little bit. So anyway, let's dive into some questions, shall we? First question comes from James in Scotland, who says, I bought a Pilot Custom 74 about a month ago from a retailer in Japan. It's generally smooth when I move the pen from left to right, from right to left, or when I write a line from top to bottom. However, when I make upward strokes vertically and diagonally, going from bottom right to top left, I get some scratchiness and poor ink flow. I'd be grateful if you could give me a possible reason for what might be happening and how I could resolve this. And then, as almost a dare, he throws in, "Ora best to you," at the bottom of the thing. So I have no idea if that's the correct pronunciation, James. I'm sure you'll tell me. But "Ora best." Maybe you roll the R's? No, I don't think so. "Ora best to you." Tell you. Anyway. Okay. So, scratchiness in one direction. Left and right is usually pretty easy to determine where the scratchiness comes from. It's if one tine is lower than the other, you'll scratch when you go across that, in that direction. Up and down plus diagonal, it can get a little tricky. What I found is a lot of nibs, when they're ground, I wish I had a better way of showing this, but the nib will be, in fact, let me see if I can draw this out here. It's going to be, so if this is the nib coming down like this, this is the nib, and this is a side view. You can't see that even a little bit. So let's see if we can do this here. Nah, that's not going to work. Sorry. Never tried this before. So basically what you want to look at under your loop is up and top to bottom with your nib. That's generally going to be the kind of the underside of the tipping of the foot of the nib. Bottom to top, you're going to want to look at the top edge of the foot of the writing surface. Sometimes people, when they polish nibs, they tend to polish a little bit of a flat spot or grind a little bit of a flat spot on there. And so a lot of times what I find is if I take some micro mesh, if this is the pen here, sorry, I'm going to use the stylus because I don't want to give away my pens. But if this is the pen here, what I often do is take micro mesh and go like this to just kind of round down that top edge of the foot a little bit. And I will also do that by changing the angle of the pen slightly. So you're going like this. Now this only really makes sense if it's a round nib. If it's a stub nib, you want to be careful about doing that, or an italic nib, because you're going to take away some of the sharpness of that. But for round nibs, if you've got it scratchy going in one direction, it's either that the nib tines aren't like this, they're like this, and so there's not ink flow coming out at the top part of the nib up here, or it's that the foot, the writing foot, sorry, is a little sharp right along here. So you can just kind of scrape up that way. Now, let me do the disclaimers again. I am not a nib meister. There's a reason I don't do nib services for other people. This is just how I would do it on my own nibs. But by doing so, you run the risk of damaging, of breaking your warranty, of damaging your pen irreparably, and often replacement nibs are not possible. So that being said, what I would do is I would do some work going from the top to the bottom and rolling the pen as you go up the micro mesh to kind of round that edge off. That should probably help a little bit. You also just might want to take a look at the ink flow to make sure that it's not pinched, that it's not like this, but it's like this. So anyway, all right, grab another question here. This one from Sterling in California, who says, you've reviewed an Omas Ogiva in the Arco Brown celluloid and revealed a Paragon in the Arco Verde, or the green Arco. In regards to those particular finishes and the shape of the pen, do you have a preference? Which barrel shape, round versus faceted, best showcases the material? So I think either one of them will showcase the material fairly well. I tend to like the round shape just a little bit better, but that's a personal preference thing. The bigger issue is not which shape shows the facets, but more how do the facets appear in that particular blank. So the blank for my green Arco is very dark, and it doesn't show up as much. I got really lucky with the blank for the brown Arco on mine. It's got a lot of contrast between the dark and the light. There's only a little bit of contrast in the green Arco. I've seen other green Arco with a lot more contrast. So I personally prefer the brown Arco just a little bit more because it's got that kind of yellowish gold tint to it, whereas the green Arco is like green and silver and black, which just is not as contrasty or bright or flashy. So I prefer the brown Arco. I personally prefer the rounded of the Ogiva style, but I also really like the Paragon style. So it's hard for me to pick just one, but that's kind of how I feel about them currently. All right. Well, let's stop beating around the bush with some of the currently inked pens. So this is another pen that came via mail call. This is from a company called Zizo. I've recorded, try to use your words, Matt, one of their pens before. This is the Architect. It is a metal-based pen. It's guillocheed and then lacquered. It's colored lacquer and then a clear coat lacquer on top of it. Comes with a number 6 size nib. It's got the Zizo marking on it. I've reviewed their pens before. I liked them. I was not in love. I really like this one. It's a great color. I love this color, and I like the guilloche on it. It's hefty, but the nib on this one is really, really good. So I got that this week. I'm just starting to put it through its paces for review purposes, but I like it quite a bit. And that is inked right now with the, sorry, let's get that to stop swinging around. with Diamine Shimmertastic Brandy Dazzle. So it's hard to see in this light the shimmertasticness of it, but we had a question about glitter inks, and I was like, I haven't used a glitter ink for a while. I should do that. So I pulled one out and inked it up, and I feel like I kind of probably should have put Blue Lightning in here because it would match so nicely, but I'm in an autumnal colors mood right now, so I got a lot of red browns and oranges and browns in my pens at the moment. So, okay, let us grab another question. This one from Andy at UC Santa Barbara, who asks, what are some do's and don'ts for vintage fountain pens? I heard for ebonite pens, water is a big don't. Which inks can I use? I've read that Noodler's ink can damage sacks and feeds, but that seems to be a Bay State problem rather than the whole brand. I only really use Apache Sunset and Black, though. That is a really wide question that's going to be kind of impossible for me to answer for a couple reasons. One, I don't know all the do's and don'ts. The other one is it's just too wide. There's too many variables. So generally speaking, with vintage pens, unless you absolutely know the material from which it's made is safe, don't soak the pen. It's okay to get it wet usually, but you don't want to leave it soaking in there overnight. Ebonite can discolor. Casein, which is what some of the old Conway Stewarts were made out of, can dissolve or get misshapen. So I generally speaking, you don't want to soak the pens. It's fine to get them wet if you have to, but get the moisture out of them and let them air dry a little bit. So that's one. Be careful with heat, particularly with celluloid pens. You don't want to use heat guns that are too hot, or you don't want to get them too hot. Ebonite's a little bit more flexible, no pun intended, that you can shape it a little bit, but celluloid can be quite flammable, actually. You want to be very careful with how you put stress on the pens. So if you're going to have to take one apart to do a restoration or something like that, make sure you absolutely understand how the pen comes apart. If you are trying to pull a pen out pull a section out that's threaded and you're not trying to twist the threads, you could very easily crack it. The older these pens get, the more delicate they become, and the more likely it is you could do some damage to the pen. So you want to be very careful. Also be very careful with, in particular, I'm thinking of the VAC celluloids, the Parker Vacuumatic celluloids, those laminated celluloids. Those laminations can come undone, as I have learned to my great misfortune on a very lovely pen that I picked up at the DC show. And getting someone who can repair that has been pretty problematic for me. So I sent it off to someone to get repaired. It came back. It was not repaired. So I don't know if that's because they forgot that's what was supposed to be done to the pen, or if something else was going on. But in any case, you just want to be careful of that as well. Try not to put too much stress on against the lamination to kind of cause it to split. As for inks, now this is a touchy subject. So I'm going to try to be careful with what I say here. Generally speaking, if you're really concerned about how inks interact with your vintage pens, you want to err on the side of safety. Safe inks include Parker Quink, Waterman inks. Most Schaefer inks are probably safe. The inks from the big manufacturers. If they make pens, chances are the inks are probably okay to use in the sacks. You want to, or with a sacked pen. You want to be careful with boutique ink manufacturers, people who are, very small operations who may not do a lot of testing. Now, you brought up Noodlers specifically. I have some Noodlers inks. The ones I have I like. I don't buy a lot of Noodlers inks anymore for my own reasons. A lot of people have sworn off Noodlers and Private Reserve and some of these other boutique inks in any pens that have a latex sack. I've never put Noodlers ink in a latex sacked pen. That's just, I've heard far too many people saying that it it can turn the sack to jelly. I know that happened to Stephen Brown. Richard Binder warns off those two brands specifically when it comes to pens with sacks in them. Brian Gray of Edison basically says, with his Menlo, he really says stay away from the boutique inks. Greg Manuskin will, if you send him a pen where it's melted the sack, he'll probably tell you should really stick to safe ones. And even at pen shows, people like Susan Worth will only use like Waterman or Parker inks to ink up their pens. So if you're really, really concerned about it, go safe and stick with those inks that where the formulas haven't changed a lot. They've been around for a long time, and we know they're safe. I have used Diamine inks, no problem. I've used Mont Blanc inks, no problem. I've used Sailor inks, no problem. But I have heard of Sailor inks causing problems with sacks. I have not used Quizzy. I have not used, and I will never use any of the glitter inks. I've used Pelikan Edelstein. So you just want to be really, really, really careful. And if you have questions about a particular ink, it's always good to ask the community or a retailer who will carry that ink. A lot of retailers, like the sponsor for this episode, Van Ness Pens, they test most of the inks that come in, including putting a sack in there and seeing, is it going to dissolve the pen, or how's it going to write. So they can provide you a little bit of background either. I will say that the dissolving sack problem, particularly around noodlers, where I have heard it, it's not limited to just Bay State Blue. There are several inks that I have heard where that can be a problem. Like I said, I don't have a lot of pens with rubber sacks in them. Those pens that I do have with rubber sacks in them, I tend to be pretty careful about what I put in them, and stick with inks from very well-known major manufacturers who have been in business for a long time. So take that for what it's worth. Do what you will with it, but there you go. Okay, let's take a quick break to talk about the sponsor for this week's episode. Now, if you've been around the pen habit for very long, you know that the Van Ness Pens has been a really great sponsor for the pen habit, and they continue to be. The company's been in business since 1938. They've got a large selection. They're one of the fixtures at pen shows with their walls of ink usually. They carry inks that you can't get anywhere else in the country. They also have a huge selection of pens and papers, and will do custom engraving and that sort of thing. They are, as they were last month, continuing to really feature the Aurora Optima and the new price drop for the Aurora Optima. So they've got those lovely pens in stock. And as I mentioned before, they are some of my favorites. I love the Aurora Optimas. I have two of them myself, and probably will be getting a third before too long. So like those pens a lot. And you can go over to vanness1938.com, check out their amazing ink selection with over 1,000 different colors or different shades of ink, and check out their paper and their pen selection, and let them know that you appreciate them sponsoring the pen habit when you do. So thank you to Van Ness Pens. Again, that's Van Ness Pens at vanness1938.com. Okay, we have another question here. This one from Becca in Minneapolis, who asks, I feel like I should be able to figure this out for myself, but why on one day does an ink behave nicely, then on the very next day, same pen and same paper, does it feather like mad? Short answer is I don't really know. Long answer is I have a few guesses. So one of them is, especially depending on the pen, water can evaporate in the pen. Especially in the nib and feed area. So it could be especially when you first start writing, the ink you're putting down has a lot more dye in it, a lot more pigment, a lot more of the lubricants, a lot more of the biocides, things that may interact differently with paper. So that's part of it. Humidity probably has has a part in that as well. The other thing is that depending on the paper, I have noticed inconsistency from sheet to sheet, or even different parts of the sheet. So sometimes a paper may not get coated super well. Sometimes it won't work out quite quite the way you want it to, or you get oil on a part of it or something, and that part of the paper behaves differently. So in my mind, it's probably a combination of those things. Evaporation, so there's less water, and the ink will stay, a little bit more oily, a little bit on top of the surface, which gives it time to feather as opposed to absorbing, that sort of thing. But I don't know for sure. I'm just guessing. So there you go. All right, let's do another pen. This is a pen that I got at which show did I get this at? I'm pretty sure I got this at the DC show in 2015, and I've reviewed it already. This is the Edison Menlo. And I realized the other day I hadn't used it for a long time, and I was thinking, I remember really liking it. I wonder why I haven't used it. So I inked it up, and I realized I was not completely in love with the nib. So I'd gotten a steel nib on it because that was all the money I had left I had left at the end of at that show, and I didn't have enough money to add the gold nib on top of it. And so I thought, I want to get a gold nib for this pen because I like the little bit more softness, and I'd gotten a fine, which was not the right nib for me. So I went online to FP Nibs that I mentioned earlier, and I got this. So this is a 14 karat gold nib. It is two-tone ruthenium, which is the black, and rhodium, which is the silver color, plated, and it's plated gold. And it's a medium. It's nice and soft. It's not a soft nib, it's bouncy. Writes really, really well, very smooth. And I've kind of fallen in love with the pen again. So I inked it up, and I've been playing around with it for the last few days. Really like it, and I suspect that now that I've got a gold nib in here, this will start appearing a little bit more regularly. And the ink I am using is this. This is the Robert Oster Signature, or Oster, I don't know how that's pronounced, Signature Blue Night. Really nice dark blue color. It's a kind of, I call it a black blue as opposed to a blue black. I don't like blue blacks that are mostly black with just a hint of blue in them. So I tend to like just really dark blues when I go that route. So really nice ink, behaves really well. I've only used it for a couple days, but so far I'm a fan. And I'm still a fan of the Menlo. There's just something about the shape of this pen in the hand for me. I wish I could. I got a little new agey in the review about the line of energy and all that stuff, but I wish I could describe it a little better. But I do just love the way this fits in my hand and floats across the paper, and it's lightweight, but still a little extra heft because of the brass mechanism for the pump filler. And of course it's just this beautiful blue, electric blue swirl material, which I also really like. Oh, I can't believe I forgot this too. So I told you it was a huge mail week. I got this. So one of my sponsors, Tom Barrington Leather Goods and Accessories, they've been sponsoring for a few months now. I have been eyeing their wallets, and he uses some unusual materials. This is the Stingray Wallet, and I posted a picture of it on Instagram. People were like, "Oh, you've got to show it on the next Currently Inked." So it's got this really cool texture to it. Plus it's green, and we all know how I love me some green. So yeah, it's a really, really cool, very nicely made. Got the, that kind of calcium pearl material. So it's like it a lot. I've only had it for about a week, so it's still getting broken in a little bit, but I love the texture of this. So that was kind of fun. That was another one. I was like, I've been looking at it. Finally, I just bit the bullet. And now that I have a job again, I was like, finally going to buy all this stuff that I've been meaning to buy, but haven't. So, all right, let's grab another question. This one comes from Peter in the Czech Republic, who says, ballpoint or fountain pen for a hot desert island. I don't use ballpoints, period, ever. Hatred. Stabby. I'd rather have no pen than have a ballpoint. Sorry. Short answer. Yeah. Isaiah, what is your favorite ink of all time and your least favorite? Why? I can't tell you what my favorite is because I don't have a favorite of all time. It changes all the time. I can tell you my least favorite is J. Urban Gris Nuage. It is a very, very, very light gray that reminds me of the cloud cover in Seattle and is too light to be used for anything in a fountain pen, aside from a little bit of shadow if you're a fountain pen sketcher. It's also in one of the worst bottles ever devised for fountain pen ink, and I just loathe that ink with the deep and fiery passion of 1,000 suns, which you can't see because it's gray clouds. All right. Next one. Jouni, is that how that's pronounced? Jouni from Finland. Says, I started using fountain pens a few months ago, and so far I only have one bottle of Waterman Tender Purple ink. What inks do you think are a must-buy for a new fountain pen user? I've been thinking about buying a bottle of Iroshizuku, haven't decided on the color yet, but I thought I want to hear your opinion since you have an amazing ink collection. So I think every fountain pen user should, if they're going to get serious about fountain pens, should get at least one ink from each of the manufacturers out there. So I think you should have at least one Sailor, at least one Pelikan, at least one Mont Blanc, if you can, one Ackermann, and one Iroshizuku, because you'll learn what the characteristics are pretty quickly. And in general, the characteristics are very similar across the line. There are some exceptions to that, clearly, but for me, essential inks: Mont Blanc Irish Green, Iroshizuku Konpeki, Pelikan Edelstein Topaz is one of my favorites, or Tanzanites if you like blue blacks. One of the Sailors, and pick a color because all Sailor inks behave really well. I personally like Okuyama, which is kind of that red with the gold sheen. And Shigure, which is the purple. De Atramentis Aubergine is one. Mont Blanc Lavender Purple is another one. If you can get Ackermann, number 5 Shocking Blue, or number 11 Trevet Turquoise, or if you like really bright colors, number 28 Hochvote Grün. So those are some of my, for me, the must-haves. If I had to start let me add in Diamine Ancient Copper. If I had to start my collection over again, those would be the inks that I would like. If my house burned down, heaven forbid, those would be the inks that I'd get first. Okay, grab one more question, then we'll do another pen. This one from Michelle in New York. With all the pens you review, when and how much time use do you devote to the pens you personally love? For instance, in your everyday life, is your personal carry largely review pens or your personal favorites? Same question for inks. I'll start with inks because that's an easier question to answer. With inks, I don't do a lot in the real world with them because when I do my ink reviews, I ink up 7-8 pens and fill out the ink review sheets. I may put an ink in a pen and kind of carry it with me for a week or two just to get a sense of how it writes on a day-to-day basis. But for the most part, whatever ink is in queue to be reviewed next is not the ink I'm carrying with me from day to day. The processes are just so very different for me that I don't want to have the same ink all the time. Pens are a little trickier, and unfortunately, not quite the way I like it. So I end up carrying, when I'm in the midst of doing a batch of reviews, I end up carrying my review pens with me almost exclusively, and I don't get enough time with the pens I like. I was at a spot last week where I had written the reviews out for a batch of pens, but I still have to do the photos and do the videos. So I didn't need to carry them with me anymore. I had the information that I was looking for. And so I cleaned out a bunch of, the old pens that had already been reviewed and everything. And it's like, I'm going to ink up some stuff I want to, because I haven't in a month. So unfortunately, I don't get to use my beloved pens anywhere near as much as I would like to. For better or for worse, I do get to find pens that I really like that I wasn't expecting to like as a process. So that's fun too. But I usually try to keep at least 2 or 3 of my personal favorites inked at home, even if I don't carry them with me to work. So if I sit down to write in my journal or I've got a lull in the review activities, I will pull out one of my beloved pens. So there you go. It's one of the downsides of doing reviews is there's a lot of pens to review, and people are like, downsides? What are you talking about? A lot of pens to review, not as much time to use the pens as I really like to use. Speaking of pens, here's the next one. This little lovely here I've shown before, but this is the first time I've inked it up since I brought it home from the DC show in 2016. This is a Carolina Pen Company pen, Jonathan Brooks pen. It is an ebonite pen with urushi lacquer, and Jonathan has been doing a lot of urushi work lately. He's really trying to teach himself the skills. He's using the real urushi that he gets shipped over from Japan, and he's just been doing really, really lovely work. So this is the red on red. He does this thing where the last turn of the pen will actually make it super tight, so you don't have to worry about the pen coming undone, but you can see here the kind of the lighter red covered by the darker red and then polished. This is another one of those pens where I put a different nib on the pen. Now, the pen came with a beautiful 18 karat gold nib, which I really like and it writes wonderfully. But I got this semi-flex nib from FP Nibs, and I can show you the difference in size between, this is a Yovo nib, and it uses a Yovo feed. But look at the difference in size between, there we go. Look at the difference in size between the two. See how it's a little bit skinnier and a little bit longer on the ebonite, the urushi pen. It's really quite a nice nib. I'm a fan of this nib. This nib will eventually end up on another pen, but it's a pen I have to review before I swap the nib out because I want to review it as it comes from the manufacturer. So once that review is done, I'll swap out the nib and put the original gold nib back on this. But I wanted to play around with this semi-flex nib and see how it did, and I like it a lot. So I have every expectation that FP Nibs is going to be getting another order from me in the not too distant future for another one or two of these that I can use to swap out a couple of other nibs, because it's a real nice one. And it is a semi-flex nib. It's not a soft nib, it's a semi-flex nib, and you can get a decent bit of line variation out of it. I'll just really quickly here kind of show you. You're not going to get the most line variation in the world, and it can railroad a little bit, but you can see, you can get some pretty decent line variation out of this nib if you don't push it too hard. So it's a nice nib. I like it a lot. And I inked up the last little bit I'm trying to get through some of my samples, so I inked up the last little bit of this Papier Plume Sepia, which I got to admit is not my favorite ink. It's a little unsaturated, a little bland for my tastes, but it shades nicely, which is good for flexi writing. So that's been fun. Okay. Grab another question or two, and then I think we're going to wrap it up. So this next one comes from Jim in Tennessee, who says, in a recent video, you expressed your dislike for Mont Blanc Permanent Blue, and I agree that it is a blah color, but it is waterproof. Is there a waterproof blue that you do like? I don't use a lot of waterproof inks. I would say take a look at the KWZ Iron Galls if you want to use an Iron Gall, or the Diatramentis Document inks if you wanted to use one of those. Aside from that, I'm afraid I can't be a whole lot of help because permanence in ink is not something I care very much about. So I know a lot of people do, and I'm not saying there's anything against that, but it's just not something that I care a lot about. You could also check out Noodler's, what's the one I used? Is it Bad Blue Heron, I think is the one, or Bad Blue Kingfisher? I have both of those. I think it's a Kingfisher one, actually. I like the Kingfisher one a little bit better, and that is a permanent ink as well, if you don't mind using Noodler's. Callie from Sweden I apologize if that's not how it's pronounced. Says, I wonder if you have had the chance to spend time with a Romeo fountain pen yet. Romeo is a Spanish manufacturer of bespoke fountain pens. Apparently, they even cast their own gold nibs. If so, what are your thoughts about these pens? If not, would you consider getting one? There are a few reviews floating around on the interwebs for your perusal. Short answer is I have not. I'm familiar with the brand name. I'm not familiar with their pens. I've never bought one. I probably would not buy one unless I got to see it in person first. So the likelihood of that, of me seeing a lot of those here in the States seems probably pretty slim. I'm not against it. It's not a brand with which I have a lot of familiarity, and not one that I would be willing to spend the money on sight unseen. So there you go. Okay, that was a pretty short one. So let's grab this one from Haidar, from Baghdad, who says, I love your videos. My question is, my Mont Blanc 149 doesn't take much ink. It runs dry really soon after I ink it up. I also have this issue with the piston. It is a bit springy at the end of the process of inking it up, so the last 2 turns of the piston will return back as if there is a spring inside. Any advice? So it sounds to me like your Mont Blanc needs to be thoroughly cleaned and the piston needs to be lubricated. That is unfortunately not something you can do yourself. That's something that, well, you can, but you have to buy a special tool to remove the nib. You'll ruin any warranty that comes with it. So what I would say is chances are your best bet is to try to send it back to Mont Blanc, have them service it. And once they've serviced it, it should come back to you nice and new again. That's just unfortunately one of the downsides with buying a Mont Blanc is they're not easily serviceable, by yourself. But that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like the lubrication on the inside of the piston has kind of worn away over time, and either the stopper of the piston, and I don't know when your Mont Blanc was made. It could be that it's a cork stopper if it's a vintage pen, or the rubber has hardened a little bit and it's getting bound up on the inside of the barrel. So I suspect that's probably what the problem is. And you'd have to send it back, either send it to someone, send it back to Mont Blanc, or get the tools necessary to take it apart, grease it up, and put it back together again. So there you go. This one is from Jacob in Miami. He says, you've talked before about treating pen collecting like putting money in the bank, or in kind of like a physical savings account, is what I've said before. Assuming when you make your withdrawal, is there a loss? There is a loss. Can you generalize in what way you can minimize that loss? Is it a get in, get out game, or can you hold on to your pens for a while? Are pens of a certain price range or brand a higher risk than others, and what would the associated renter's fee be? So this is a big question, and one that I'm not super qualified to answer, but I'll do my best here. So one of the things that I think people often mistake about this hobby is that there's going to be a lot of money to be made in investing in pens. And in general, I don't know that that's true. Pens can go up in value, but they, with only very, very, very few exceptions, they're generally not going to. If you want to minimize the loss of value, keep the original packaging, keep the pen in pristine, uninked, never used condition. You'd want to focus on pens that are limited editions, very small runs, or from companies that are well liked and well loved, but don't put out a lot of pens or don't exist anymore. Those are kind of the keys to at least getting your money back. If you ink a pen, it's automatically going to lose value. If you throw away the packaging, you automatically lose value. Now, if you plan on keeping your pens, that doesn't matter. But if you're buying pens to turn around and sell them and hopefully break even, if not make a profit, first of all, I would recommend you look in a different arena if that's what you want to do. But if that is what you want to do and you want to do it in fountain pens, you need to become a collector. You need to become an expert in whatever area it is you want to focus on. It's impossible to say what the renter's fee is. It varies. It varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, from pen to pen, and from month to month. A really good example of this is the Pelikan M805 Stresemann. Now, this was a pen that people went ape poopy over when it first was announced. It was like, oh my gosh, it's got a silver nib, a rhodium plated nib, it's this beautiful silver color, and people were like, I want it, I want it, I want it. It was everywhere on Instagram, and you cannot get rid of these things right now. I sold mine, but I sold it for an almost $150 loss. From what I bought it for, because I just wanted to move it along to someone who would actually enjoy using it. So it's impossible to say. Other pens I've been able to turn around for and only lose $25. With the exception of a couple of vintage pens where I've taken them apart, repaired them, put them back together again, I've never made a profit on any of my pens. So yeah, I'd say if you want to maximize the potential or minimize the risk, stick with limited editions, look at high-end pens, look at things where there aren't a bazillion of them on the market and where people like them. And then, if you're going to buy them to turn them around, don't ink them up. Or if you do ink them up, treat them very, 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 very carefully. Try to minimize scratching. Don't have any custom work done on the nibs. Leave the nib in original condition and use the pen until you're tired of it, and then turn around and sell it. And hopefully you'll minimize your loss there. Okay, well, I think that is going to do it for this episode of Currently Inked. Thank you for joining me for this little chat once again. Huge thank you again to Van Ness Pens at vanness1938.com for supporting this episode of The Pen Habit. Don't forget to go over and check out their Aurora Optima collection. As always, it's a great pen. And with the new price drop, it's really a great value as well. Also, Van Ness Pens carries the Inky Fingers notebooks. So if you want an Inky Fingers notebook, but don't want to do a separate order through me, you can just order it through Van Ness Pens when you buy your Aurora Optima. And if you do want to order one through me, you can do that as well at penhabit.com. Head over there to check out the show notes as well. And we will see you here next time on Currently Inked. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.